how this is such a key time for us as we move forward, as we go forth into the season ahead. And with that, I want to share some things with you to try to tie in together. I greet all of you out there. I thank God for you as you move forward, as you're moving into what God is telling you from nation to nation to nation, wherever you're at, from state to state to state. We're in a very, very critical time, but probably the most awesome time for our entry into the new. So this is so key for us. This Pentecost is key. This Pentecost, of course, Pentecost every time is about provision and about the provision that's to come. It's about the provision materialistically that we need. You've got to have some physical provision to make it in days ahead. And it's about abundant revelation falling down on you. You've got to know and have God revealed to you what he's saying. Not just something that you've known in the past. Wisdom is great, but we've got to have revelation where the spirit of revelation uncovers the path for our future. And then it's also about power that is coming upon us. Pentecost and power are synonymous. Harvest and Pentecost are synonymous. So you have to remember we've been moving in, really, it's been about 70 days that we've been moving in the dynamic that we've been moving worldwide, but it's been 50 days since Passover that we've been moving forward. Now, God ordered that time. That is a Jubilee time every year that we enter in, of counting the Omer, so that you can get a strategy to remove debt from your life and to come into a new order for your life. And so this, if you will remember, at Rosh Hashanah and before, actually, as we started seeking the Lord said we would have a modern day Passover this year, where Passover would be like Passover at the beginning. Never before in history have we seen that happen the way we saw it this season. Probably there's records in the early church, as Robert was saying, moving from home to home to home, where people had to stay in their homes to worship out of persecution and out of change that was going on worldwide, actually hiding out, especially after Constantine's declaration of the church becoming legal. See, what they forbid after that time was the public worship of Passover, and they forbid Rosh Chodesh, the worship of God's people where they gathered at first fruits. And so when we look at a modern day Passover, we're looking at God during this 50 days restoring those elements where we are coming out in worship, where we're not only worshiping in our homes, but we're getting ready to come out into a new place of boldness. This Pentecost is about boldness. Whether you've ever experienced it or want to experience, we're going to have to allow the boldness of Holy Spirit to come. I look back at some of the things that the Lord has said during the time and that we were prophesying at Rosh Hashanah back in September, how riots would break out and how things would be happening during this time. Things are happening because there is a cry for liberty and change in the earth realm. We have to have new liberty. And this Pentecost is about you warring for your freedom. It's about you stepping under and being empowered and warring for the freedom ahead. This is not the same as anything we've ever experienced before, because God pulled us aside to empower us so we would war into the future. It's almost like what he said at the beginning of Judges. He left enemies in the land so the next generation would learn to war. Instead of just trying to receive the blessings that had been, they would war for their future. I'm telling you, this is a time like never before. A new generation must rise up in war. But if we had a modern day Passover, we're coming into this present day Pentecost, and that's what we want you to worship your way into. That's what we want you to enter in and move forward as you advance in the season ahead. And so let me show you some things that are very key. See, we are living in a time of crossing over. The new book ahead that will be out, I think, within a week for all of you is called The Passover Prophecies. And it talks about an era of us passing over. See, we are having to understand that this Passover becomes so key for us. Things that we're going through, the actual confinement of people in states where they can't worship, what God has said for the last 40 years, 30 years concerning what would happen in America, that little by little we would go into a incredible confinement of freedom, that by 2020, China would be vying for their dominant economic influence worldwide. And if we didn't shift right in 2020, and I've written this in 3-4 different books, that if we didn't shift by this year, we would end looking just like China in America. Are you aware of what that means? They've just cracked down on Hong Kong. They bulldoze over churches. There is already a law being asked to be activated on behalf of Illinois, where if churches meet, they can bulldoze those churches down. I am telling you, we are in a different era, and if ever before, we need the Pentecost, the Spirit of God to come on us. For our children and our children's children, we have to have Pentecost. We must war for this Pentecost. We must war during this Pentecost. This is a key time like never before. But we're living in this season of crossover. The original Passover was about redemption. We're being redeemed from the enemy's oppression. I want you to shout it right now. The enemy will not have right to oppress me. Wherever you're at out there, I want you to shout that. It was a Passover when they had been held captive for 400 years, where they couldn't enter their promise, 420 something years where they couldn't enter their promise. And so that Passover, this Passover is about us entering into our promise. I want you to shout, I am crossing over into my promises. You find in the Word of God the Passover of the double portion. Elijah told Elisha, if you'll follow me all the way till you see me ascend, you will wear my mantle. That was 7 years after Elijah had promised him his mantle. I'm telling you right now, and he told Elisha, you'll have a double portion of what I had. Some of you have been pressing and pressing and pressing for the last 7 years. You need to say, I am ready to cross over into my double portion. And then there's always the Passover of return, where you are coming back to a place where some way you got sidetracked and got off track, or the enemy diverted you, or you had to divert because you weren't strong enough to war something. Say, I am returning, and I'm returning with a new power and a new boldness. And then I think when Yeshua came, I call that the Passover of fulfillment. They had been waiting and waiting and waiting thousands of years for Messiah to come. It had been prophesied by the prophets. 400 years it had been dark from Malachi to Matthew. But all of a sudden there was this divine alignment from heaven. Say it out loud. Heaven and earth are aligning. And once that divine alignment occurred, he came. It says that in Matthew chapter 1, 14 generation seasons aligned, and all of a sudden he came. So at Passover, when he went to the cross on our behalf to be sacrificed on our behalf where we would be redeemed by his blood, all of a sudden the fulfillment that God had for all mankind was now active in the earth realm. You need to say, I'm finding my fulfillment this season. Then there's the Passover of advancement. There comes a time where the early church had to say, wait a minute, we've stayed in the upper room long enough. You need to say it sometimes. Sometimes you've prayed long enough. You've stayed in that upper room long enough, and now we got to come out and we got to show who we are. I decree this is we have not only entered a crossing over of advancement, we've entered the Pentecost that brings us out and brings us in to who who we are. You need to say it, I'm going to be who God made me to be. And so what I want to share with you as we enter this incredible time is the Pentecost season that Joshua experienced. No, it wasn't just the falling down of the Spirit, because we'll be looking at that the whole time as we go through this Pentecost time. But I don't want us to miss Joshua's Pentecost, because I feel like it's key for us this year. I feel like it really looks like what we're going through this year. It was the time for them to cross over and then enter in. See, that's what this Pentecost is about. It's about crossing over and entering in. It's about the steps that it takes as we move into this new season. Now let's look at what happened as Joshua led the people after 476 years of God waiting. Look at somebody and say, God's been waiting for us for a long time. Matter of fact, tell somebody God can outwait you till you're ready. See, he will just wait and wait and wait till you say, I can't take it anymore. I got to cross over. We need to be saying that right now. We can't take it anymore in 2020. We have got to cross over. We have got to cross over. And so notice what happened. They're all held up. They're at a place where they've come out. Now they're ready to go in. Matter of fact, they've been held from going in another 40 years because of their murmuring and unbelief. And God had to get rid of all sorts of atmosphere of murmuring and unbelief to get them ready to move in. He had to take leaders out that had no faith. They murmured and they were filled with unbelief. He had to wait till all of them die off. God will wait until certain things die out before we can move in to what he has for us right now. And that's what this Pentecost looks like. And so with that, they're held up, and the Lord tells them the first thing, I want you, he meets with Joshua first. He says, I will cause you to succeed if you meditate day and night on everything I've said. Now, that included the Torah that Robert explained earlier, or is explaining to us, that came down during Pentecost. See, he had sent the Torah when they were in the wilderness to them. That had come down. The commandments had come down. But now, during these 40 years, they had been forming a testimony. Now, let me tell you about a testimony. A testimony, this is why hell hates your testimony. A testimony produces the spirit of prophecy in you. A testimony isn't just for today, it's forever. Say it out loud. That's why hell wants your testimony knocked out of place, because that testimony is going to go forever. And every time you meditate on that testimony, you're going to gain new strength, and the spirit of prophecy is going to come, and all of a sudden you're going to prophesy into the future. And so he told Joshua, he said, I will cause you to succeed as you lead these people across. And so the first thing he told him to do was pull aside for 3 days, sanctify yourself. Watch what you eat. Don't allow sexual relationships to draw your emotions away. I want you sanctified. I want you set apart for the new season ahead. I believe the Lord is telling us he wants us set apart as we're going into this incredible historical Pentecost that he has for us. Then they crossed over. There comes a time where you have to make the effort to say, I am going into the future. I'm afraid. I don't know what's going on. I might be confused, but I ain't going back. That you have to say, there comes a time I cross over. I cross over. I remember in an early history of this church, we were in a small building and God was pressing us out. And I remember John Dixon got up and said, I want you to look around this building. And as you look, I want you to say, we're not here anymore. See, and everybody in that gathering looked around and said, we're not here anymore. And the Lord never let us go back in. We met outside the next week. See, there comes a time where that faith has to be active, and you have to say, I have moved on with the Lord. Say it out loud. But here's the hard thing. They had to learn a new way of moving forward. See, at their crossover, the Lord removed what was familiar for them. He removed the cloud. He removed the fire. He removed the food they had been eating. He removed everything. It was like they had been caught in this chasm of wilderness. That is not the will of God for us. And he doesn't move us forward just to send us into a new wilderness. That is not what God does. He moved us forward, and he said to them, you're going to have to watch what I have had inside Moses' tabernacle, where my presence has been. I'm going to set my presence out in front of you. You've got to get used to my presence. That ark also carried that Torah, Robert has explained to us. It was filled with all of that. It was filled with last season's authority realm. But all of a sudden, it's moving forward, and he's got the priest established that they're going to have to learn to follow in days ahead. I'm telling you, at this Pentecost, we can't go back into an old pastoral understanding. We've got to see that Yeshua himself after Passover gave gifts to mankind. He gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be teachers, some to be pastors, some to be evangelists, some to be miracle workers, some to be healers, some to be administrators, and he had an order of the alignment of those gifts. This Pentecost, God is requiring us to see our divine alignment and how we are aligned in the future. And so they move forward. Now, when they move forward, they just don't enter in and all of a sudden they're in the promise. He stops them. They're afraid of all the giants. That's why they wouldn't enter in 40 years prior. Now they're in the land with all the giants. And do you know the first thing he makes them do is circumcise themselves? Are you aware of the vulnerability of circumcision? He says, I'm going to make you so vulnerable in this new season that you don't have a choice but to depend on me. See, I see this Pentecost that we've entered in where it's such a vulnerable place right now that we have to depend upon the Lord. And so with that, they then rolled away their reproaches of the past. Now, notice this. They had sanctified themselves. Now they were rolling away at Gilgal their past. There's one thing to get sanctified and say, I'm going to be good and I'm going to be set apart going into the new season. There's another way to say, I am rolling everything away that even from my past that does not need to cross over. The reproach, the heaviness of the past, the oppression of the past, the slander of the past. I'm rolling it away. And then notice what they did. They had to participate in Passover before they could go in to promise. I want you to say that out loud. I've done Passover this year. Now I'm going into promise. See, it was the first Passover they had participated in since they left Egypt. And when they left Egypt, they had reproaches. Now the Lord was saying, let me roll away your reproach so you can be new and fresh coming out of this Passover, because what's ahead for you is all the promise that I have been waiting for since I met with Abraham. Therefore, that's what I see this Pentecost about. And notice we had that gathering about angels. The first thing that happens before they move forward after Passover, they had to have angelic visitation. Now, I'm telling you, we have to welcome in the angels. Let's stop right now. Welcome in visiting angels. Welcome in warring angels. Welcome in harvest angels. We have to welcome in the angels that will guide us into this new season. And those angelic hosts are bringing revelation as we worship. That's why we've concentrated so much on worship during these 50 days. Those angelic forces are bringing visitation. And then, here's what I want to show you. I look at these last 70 days, not just the last 50 days, but it really started a couple of weeks before Passover. I look at it like a Jericho march. Week after week, we have marched around. We've pulled aside. 7 is linked with fulfillment. The first thing that they had to encounter was that which appeared invincible and that would stop their future. And yet, God already had a plan. He already had a plan to take that down, that thing that would stop your future. But he required a different level of corporateness. Now, I want to say this. This Pentecost is about an individual alignment, and it is about a corporate alignment. And it's about a territorial advancement, and it's about a generational movement. This is so key for us as we move forward. They had to work together with sound to produce the earthly shift that needed to occur over what was invincible for their future. Now, we're going to enter back into sound in just a moment, and we want to be ready to move forward. Let's get in place for that. Because it is that sound that tore down was the first step in tearing down what would allow them to enter in fully and conquest what needed to be conquested. Round and round, they went around Jericho until the moment where sound had to come down, and you can study it scientifically. It had to penetrate the structures and cause the structure to fall. Now let me stop there and say this. We are on the verge of the conquest ahead. I want you to say that. There is a great conquest ahead for us. There's a great movement for us. We have to have provision. We have to have revelation, and we have to have power. That's what this Pentecost is about, because war after war is ahead for the transference of both wealth and harvest into God's kingdom. God is rallying and regathering his people to put us into a new order so we can move into his kingdom plan ahead. You wouldn't be listening to this if you weren't part of that people. Now let's let that sound give us access into our conquest. This Pentecost, we decree that sound is shifting. Sound is shifting. Sound that will knock down the invincible. Sound that will create a movement. Sound that will cause us to stop and move forward. A movement in us where we won't fall to the same problems that they fell to after Jericho, where we will move, we will hear angelic revelation being brought from Father to us. So we keep moving without being hindered. This is a key time. Enter in to this historical Pentecost for today. Let's give a shout.
Oh, I hear the sound of a mighty rushing wind. I hear the sound. I hear the sound. Oh, I hear the sound of a mighty rushing wind. I hear the sound. I hear the sound. I hear the sound of a mighty rushing wind. I hear the sound. I hear the sound.
And I hear the Lord saying that you have to have a tabernacle of David, because he was the only leader that led by the Spirit of God. He listened to what the Lord said, and he came out of his presence, and he made decrees, and he shifted, and the Lord backed him up in everything that he did. And the Lord says this is a season where war is coming to where you are. And unless you are standing in the presence of David's tabernacle and hearing what God says and decreeing from there, nothing will shift or change. The Lord says it is my Spirit that brings shifts. And this is the season when the dream that Chuck had with the scorpions all over, and he ate the scorpions because he didn't know what to do, because the next step were hybrids. And in this nation, we have elected hybrids to office. And this is the season that the hybrids will not have care or authority over the Pentecost provision or over the provision or the finances of God. He is shifting that today.
Wow. Now, let me just show you quickly what Ann's talking about. In the dream, there was a storehouse for me to get in the storehouse to reap all of what was stored, there were 8 hybrid snakes, 4 on each side, aligned. And I looked and said, Lord, I don't know how to get past those hybrid snakes. They've got venom. They've got things that we've not dealt with. And all of a sudden, scorpions began to crawl up. And the Lord spoke to me and he said, eat the scorpions. Eat the scorpions. And I awakened. When I awakened, I studied scorpions. They have the most incredible anti-venom structure within them. They can heal diseases by 1 portion of their venom. And the Lord's saying to you, a lot of things you've been going through have been like scorpions. And if you will let that which you have built up within you, the resistance from your testings of the past, all these hybrid structures, whether it's COVID, and right there you have to understand, those are man-made viruses. They are hybrid viruses. They are mutated viruses. And the Lord said, but I'm giving my people a resistance to get past them one by one, because this Pentecost is about recovery. It's about unlocking provision that's been locked up. Get ready, enter in, worship, and watch that structure against the Antichrist rise up within you, and watch triumph start coming.